Are we on? Oh, we were most definitely on. Good morning, all. Good morning, good morning. So, I'd love to call us to order, by the way, an order of business. For those of you feeling a little warm, I have set a fashion statement. Please feel free to be as comfortable as you'd like. It's a little toasty today. So I'm going to call us to order first by introducing Demetrius Neely, Executive Director, King Arts Complex. Demetrius, thank you for letting us be here.
Absolutely. Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm always, okay, I think it's better. I first want to offer a disclaimer. It will get more comfortable in this room. We had to call our HVAC folks here, but they'll be here shortly. And those doors are open so that it can be more comfortable now, but it should get more comfortable during the day. So just bear with us on that. Good morning. I want to welcome you all to the King Arts Complex. We are delighted that you chose our venue for your meeting today. And I want to say, because this is not working, I want to say that this work that you do, the most important work that any of us do in our life is the work we do with our children. Most important, bar none. And so the number one trajectory, perhaps, other than parenting, toward whether a child develops well is education. And this work that you're doing now will make a major difference in the education of our children. And so it can't be more important. You can't do anything more important than what you're doing today. So I applaud you all for being involved in this work. And I think I'm going to take this off. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Oh, great. Okay, so I want to say one thing, though, about the King Arts Complex. We have a tremendous youth education year-round program. We partner with schools, local schools, Trevitt, Champion, Wyland Park, and we have it's a year-round program. It's youth education, after-school enrichment program. It gets rave reviews. It's great stuff. We have a summer camp that gets rave reviews. Some of you may have sent your kids to our summer camp, which is very good. So if you ever want to talk to me about what we do here at the King Arts Complex around youth education, feel free. It's really a good program. But I know you didn't come to hear about that. I know you are excited about your meeting today. So thank you for doing this work, because the kids matter to all of us. They're all our kids. Good. Have a good meeting, and thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. Thank you all for time and effort you continue to put in. I know I've been talking to many of you and just so appreciative of how seriously everybody's been taking all this work. I'm going to be very, very brief this morning because, first of all, we don't have that much to cover. You know everything that there is to know at this point in terms of the where we are. The most important thing, as always, is if you're trying to get online, the broadband information for the day. I feel like I hold the secret codes to the to the briefcase or something. It has been revealed to me that the username is CEC April 10th. So when you go on the the list of website of internet options, there is the Columbus Education Commission April 10th. It was set up especially for us, and the password is BEST Education, BEST Education, Best Education. All right, and I've already signed in, so I know it's working. So thank you for everybody to do it. So let me just very briefly review with you as I've tried to do every meeting, what we've been doing in terms of our community outreach, and then we also, I think most of you know, we have one more major community event coming up, before our final meeting on April 26th, but I want to make sure you know that. So we have had now, we've by now had 17 public meetings in the community that have drawn well over 1,000 people. Many of you I know have been at these meetings. I've been at as many of them as I can. I have to say they have been truly powerful conversations, and you will certainly feel them as you see the draft recommendations that are coming from the staff, because there's no question they've helped shape the way we're hearing some of the information that comes through in our full meetings of the Commission. So those are now basically concluded, as well as the focus groups, which you previously have received the report of. As you know, we've had the postcard campaign underway. They're still continuing to come back, but at this point we've received over 2,000 postcards that have been sent back to our team, and those we continue to gather that information and to codify it, and we will of course have a good, accurate summary of those postcards in the report. We'll say more about this when we get to the final report, but in addition to the operative parts, which you'll be discussing here, the draft recommendations both today and on the 26th, there will be an extensive appendix that is being prepared. It's already been gathered, which will have all of the information that you've reviewed, all of the input, all of the reports from the community meetings, and of course, more importantly, there'll be a digital version of that will have links straight through to the materials themselves, right? So if somebody wants to see it, because we can't obviously publish all the volumes of material that you've reviewed, but we can have a digital version that links to everything that you've seen. So the postcards will be part of that, and that's already underway. The TV spot is now up and running, and I believe we showed you the TV spot the last meeting, but it is now on, and you see the number of views we received, and it is the goal of it is to encourage people to also send in postcards and ideas, right? So this was another venue for us to alert the community that this is going on. If people haven't seen it yet, even though we're deeply immersed in this, so it's hard to imagine that there's anybody in town that doesn't know that the Columbus Education Commission is seeking input and out there doing its work, but yet, trust me, there are people going on with their daily lives who didn't know we were doing this, so hopefully the commercials will help with that. As I think we mentioned this, but since we've had from time to time the subject of budget has arisen, we purchased some of this time, but part of the deal with the TV stations was that they would donate a like amount of in-kind spots together with the time that we purchased. So we're really getting a double bang for our buck. And the ad is on the website. So if you want to send the ad to somebody or you want to post it on your own organization's website, you can just simply take it off of the Reimagine Columbus Education website, and feel free to use the ad. There's no copyright, no intellectual property. You're not going to get a cease and desist letter from Judge Marbley. Just take the ad and do with it what you will. We've had now almost over 10,000, almost 11,000 visits to our website. You can imagine these things tend to spike around meetings or when we post things that are new, like our draft recommendations. But this is a pretty solid number of people who've been to our website. Again, considering this is an organization that didn't exist before and it's a brand new site, we've had a very good response. The Twitter feed continues to be active, and once again, these will spike during the day, like a day like today. People are following us, they're following the live feeds, and they're commenting on what they're seeing. So there's the efforts that that the Commission has made to make its work transparent and available to everybody, I truly believe have been well received and have paid off in the community, because there are people who are not able to be with us today, but they're following the meetings at home. I also wanted to make sure you know that we have posted the 4 proposals that you're reviewing today on the website almost simultaneously to when we hit the send button to send them out to you on Friday. We thought it important that they be available to those who've been following this work, as well as to the members of the Commission. We also summarized them in a blog post that was posted if people didn't have time to read the entire draft. So those have been up on the website. They remain up on the website. And I'll say this so anybody who's following the live feed today knows that as the Commission is discussing these documents today, they can pull them up on the website and follow along with the discussion. The special opportunity of the day, I believe you all are aware of this, but Secretary Duncan will be here on April 19th at 6 p.m. You've received invitations from the Mayor's office to this special event. This is specifically timed and designed for the Secretary to become familiarized with the work of the Commission, to get his update his sense of what's happening in education in Ohio's capital city. It doesn't escape any of us that what happens in Ohio is an important national bellwether, and what happens in the capital of Ohio is an important national bellwether. And I think this reflects the concern and commitment that the Secretary and, frankly, the President, through the Secretary, have, that they're aware of what we're doing. They've been aware of what we're doing. Now as we come towards the conclusion of this Commission's work, the Secretary wants to come and check in with us. So we certainly look forward to it. We know the time is Friday at 6 o'clock isn't necessarily the optimal time on all of our calendars, but of course we understand and appreciate the Secretary has quite a challenging calendar, and this is the time that he was available to do this. Today's meeting is really very straightforward. We have 2 presentations that we'll begin with. As you know, as you remember, we surveyed members to ask what issues that people thought required either additional time or a return engagement, or something we had overlooked or not sufficiently dealt with. And one of the topics that we were asked to spend a little more time on was the subject of school climate and discipline and related issues, truancy and safety in the community. We were very, very fortunate to have Dr. Belfans from Johns Hopkins, who's the leading expert in this field, and also has been working here in the Columbus community in ways that he'll share with you. Dr. Belfans is here, and he will be shortly taking the microphone to discuss that important issue with us. These were some of the relevant reasons why Dr. Belfans' presentation was particularly timely. The Kids Ohio, my good colleague Mark Reel's organization, has done a lot of analysis over the years of critical discipline data in the schools. When you actually look at the data, it often gives you a very different picture than what conventional wisdom might tell you. One of these is this very small number of students who are involved in a very large number of the discipline matters. And of course, wanting, I've got to get out of Mary Lou's way, so she can see, wanting, conversely, if only a small number are responsible for a large number of the violations, then it logically follows that a large number are not at all involved in discipline issues. And of course, one of the very strong pieces of input we got at the public meetings consistently was, from parents who worry that too much of the time and attention of school leaders and teachers is spent on the small number of discipline issues, therefore taking away time and attention from learning for the large number of students who are not involved in any of these issues whatsoever. And that's, again, the reason for our conversation this morning. The second presentation we have, we're very fortunate to have Mike Feinberg, one of the founders of KIPP. We, of course, heard from Hannah Powell-Tooney, the director of the KIPP Columbus Academy, about their work here. But what is really interesting to us, and of course this visit comes courtesy of Judge Marbley and his willingness to reach out to Mr. Feinberg. But what really interests us here is, as we continue this discussion that we began at the last meeting about how do you think about a large district, and what is the relative, how do you place relative responsibility and authority at the central office versus at the school level? A conversation that's bubbled up several times, but most notably during the governance discussion last time, and will most certainly be one of the topics that'll be in our drafts for the next meeting. How do we, here's an example of a network that is now national in scope, and almost as large as the Columbus City Schools. I mean, the parallel in size is really very interesting, almost about the same number of schools, slightly fewer students, but certainly growing at a rate where their size will match the Columbus City Schools almost student for student within a short period of time. So how does that network, which relies on a brand, right, and relies on an understanding that if you go to a KIPP school anywhere, you have certain things in common, but also has to rely on local involvement for hiring and for supervision and for board involvement and all of those kinds of things. How do they balance those questions, and what can we learn from that as we head into our final discussion of that question of the location of various authorities? And of course, we are fortunate to have the KIPP Journey Academy right here in Columbus, Ohio. So that's our, and then we'll have lunch. We've got tables set up, as you can see, for lunch. We may get to these recommendations before lunch, hopefully we will. But then, as you know, we have four draft papers for your consideration, and our co-chairs will lead us through the discussion of those draft recommendations. I just want you to know that we have excellent note takers who will make sure that anything that if the co-chairs indicate that a comment or change or correction or addition or subtraction has been agreed to, that Madam Chair and Chairman, we have folks from Kids Ohio who are here will be accurately taking that down. I've invited my good colleague Mark Reel to join me at the table so that we can respond to any questions that people might have about the drafts. Where did these things come from? Because while I take full responsibility, I could not have possibly done it without Mark's support and assistance. So Mark is here to help us. His staff is here to take good notes. And any changes that get made today, we will be able to immediately incorporate and then send back out a revised draft reflecting the work that is occurring here. I'm sorry, Madam Chair? Oh.
I just wanted to let you know that I've asked Mr. Jester to make the introduction.
Dr. Bob. Thank you very much. So I am done. And with that, I was going to turn it back to the chairwoman, who I think is going to take it to turn it over to Mr. Jester.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Commission to welcome Dr. Bob Balfans to Columbus. He got here actually early this morning on his flight. So Bob is taking the fashion statement direction from Mr. Barrett for his presentation today. His bio is under the tab that is titled School Climate, so you could read all the great background on Dr. Balfans Balfans for yourselves. One thing I wanted to highlight, though, that in his multiple capacities as a leader nationally in school reform, school education topics and issues, he is a co-founder of Diplomas Now. Diplomas Now is an evidence-based school transformation model for high-needs middle and high schools, which combines whole school reform, which enhances school supports guided by early warning systems, and it's a winner of the federal I-3 grants. And it's currently being implemented in 40 schools across 12 districts around the country. Columbus is one of those districts. So we have Dr. Balfans' team working here in Columbus at South High School, Mifflin High School, and at Linden McKinley. It is a partnership with the Columbus City Schools and community-based organizations. So Johns Hopkins is in the loop, City Year, Communities and Schools, and Learning Circle. So in keeping with the tone of the commission of having local and national experts with us, pleased that Bob is with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And first I want to begin by just really thanking you for what you're doing. As I go around the nation really talking a lot about what it takes to keep all kids on the path to high school graduation, prepared for college and career, I always say I've never seen a place succeed where the community was not deeply involved and invested. That really schools can't do it alone anymore because really there's been a big shift, right? It used to be, we know, Columbus is a great example, 30 years ago, you could have a high school diploma, get a job, and support a family, and send your kids to college. And we know in the 21st century, right, there's no work if you're a high school dropout anymore, really no work, and limited work to support a family if you don't have a high school degree and some post-secondary schooling or training. And to say that all kids have to get that now is a big shift, right? Schools weren't designed. The Great American School, which drove this nation, Great American School System, which drove this nation, drove Columbus, the prosperity of the 20th century, was based on the premise that, 15% of kids needed acceleration, 15% needed extra help, and the great mass of kids just needed a good lesson every day, that they would, and then they'd be okay. Now we need high outcomes for all kids, and we have greater pockets of concentrated poverty. It's a much more daunting thing, and if the community's not involved, it's not going to happen. And as you all recognize, it's the community that bears the cost, right? Kids drop out of school but stay in the community, right? And so coming together as you are is just really essential to solving it, and I just wanted to commend you for that. Before I dive in to talk about what it takes to keep all kids on track in general, and specifically school climate and school discipline's role, I just want to add two more things about our background so you can use that to filter what I'm saying. So our group, the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins, does three things. We work on sort of the analytics, understanding the magnitude of the problem, its location, what drives it. So for example, this past Monday I was with a group that testified at the U.S. Senate around school discipline, and it was about a whole bunch of new research studies that were released to really try to get an analytic understanding. Then we work on tools and models like Diplomas Now, which you heard about, where actual solutions working in actual schools on the ground. And then we also do capacity building efforts. So just yesterday, I was at the Pennsylvania Department of Education working on them on rolling out a statewide early warning system that's actually really being championed, interestingly enough, by the First Lady of Pennsylvania. Again, this idea of a broader community coming together to make things happen. So what I want to talk about today to you, and then there'll be lots of time for questions, is what does it take to keep all kids on the graduation path, and what is the role of school discipline and school climate? And the way I would like to begin this is to say that in all my work, all my research, all my work in schools, all my work on the ground, all my work in communities, two things stand out as drivers of student success. One is the quality of their coursework, right? That's where thinking actually happens. The actual work you're doing with your mind in the classroom is your coursework. Things like assessment, curriculum, they all drive that. But what makes you do you develop your mind or not is the quality of the coursework you do. So that's just aside. We'll come back to that. Number two is the quality of relationships you have with adults in the school, especially in the secondary grades, but also younger. And the reason for this is we can have the best curriculum in the world, the best teachers, but if students don't attend, behave, and try on a regular basis, it doesn't matter how great the teacher or the curriculum is if the students aren't doing their part, if they're not engaged, if they're not there, if they're not listening, they're not trying, they're not going to be learning. And we actually face lots of challenges when we look with adolescents and adult relationships in schools, right? This is a lot of the stress we've talked about. And when we look at the data, we see three big sort of warning signs that tells us those relationships often are not in great places. we see high levels of chronic absenteeism. And this is just one thing to also put on your radar screen, which is that for any school, you could look up on the web today what its average daily attendance is. You cannot look up and find what percent of kids in that school are missing a month or more of school. What percent of kids in that school are coming every day, missing 5 or fewer days. And it's actually those two facts that tell you, is this a school where kids are coming every day or not? Because it turns out you could have an average daily attendance of 90%, which might seem good. 90% is an A, right? We're hardwired. 90 is good no matter what we say. And if we see literacy rates of 40%, we'd say, well, attendance could be better, but it's pretty good. But let's really narrow focus on literacy, because that's really horrible and bad and important. But the way the numbers work is that 90% could be different kids on different days. And you could still have 25% of your kids missing a month or more of school behind that 90% average daily attendance. And if you drill down and saw who was on that 40% below proficiency in literacy, that's going to be a high proportion of the kids missing a month or more of school. And until you connect those two, right, we can have great instruction, but if the kids aren't there, it's not going to matter. We can see that's an element of not strong relationships. The next one is to look at suspensions, right? I haven't seen the data myself for Columbus, but I've been in many, many urban districts in America, and I bet they're high. And again, that's basically saying, like, go away, right? It's not working. Don't be here today. And if you're not there, and that shows a breakdown in relationships. And finally, if you look at GPAs, grade point averages, I bet they're low too. And that's a measure of effort. So you could say, if we looked at our data, we probably see attendance issues, behavior issues, attendance efforts, all which speak underlying to not strong relationships between adults and students. And why this is so important, especially when we put poverty into the mix, is if we know kids aren't coming to school regularly, if they're not behaving, if they're not trying, we're going to have to do one of two things. We're going to have to change their behavior, and all of us that have adolescents know one-on-one in the best conditions, that's not easy, right? And number two, we're probably going to have to solve some problems. Because there's probably some underlying issues in many cases behind why they can't come to school every day, why they're getting in trouble, why their effort is not that high. The only way to change behavior and to solve problems is to gain their trust. We have to know them, right? If we don't know them and if they don't know us, and if we're not talking, we're not going to be able to change their behavior. We're not going to be able to solve their problems. So that's why that adult relationship is fundamental. And then the final thing to keep in mind is that many secondary schools aren't organized to foster student-adult relationships outside of just the narrow thing of I'm a teacher, here's what we're going to do, here are the school rules. Because think about it. Many are still organized on a disciplinary basis, which has a lot of strengths. This is the English wing. This is the math wing. And people meet in departments. So you can talk math, you can talk English, which is very important. That's got to happen. That's how we meet the Common Core. It's how we scaffold, how everything is interconnected, how we build over time. But we can't talk kids, because I'm teaching 150 kids math. I might be teaching 2 9th grade classes, 1 10th grade class, a 12th grade class. You're teaching a different combination. We have no idea who their English teachers are. So we can never talk kids. We can only talk subjects. So we can't pool our knowledge of that student, right? Because we can't all know every one of our 150 students. That's impossible. But we can know a subset. And if we know, and someone else knows a different subset, and another person knows a different subset, we need to have a way to pool that knowledge. And we've seen this is very powerfully when teachers do this. It changes their whole viewpoint of students. Because they often find, for example, this kid is always missing my class. I find that very disrespectful. And then they find out it's first period. And then they find out from the English teacher, who the kid's got a relationship and confided with, that he's actually taking his dad to chemotherapy in the morning. Right? But he's not saying that. He's not comfortable saying that. And until the math teacher knows that, right, that dramatically changes her attitude towards that kid. And the whole relationship changes. So until we create structures that let especially secondary teachers get to know their kids, we can't form those relationships to get the trust, to change the behavior, and to solve the problems. So that's a macro look at the issue. And that each of these things drive each other, right? Kids that miss school then often get frustrated and act out, get in trouble, miss some more school, get low grades, get disengaged because they have low grades, come less often. And as we see in a minute, By the time they get to high school and they're struggling, kids are probably have all these things interacting. In the middle grades, it usually just starts in one domain, and that's going to be a key thesis we're going to talk about, how to really see the middle and high school grades together and really do early intervention as early as 6th grade when just one of these issues starts to pop up before it gets to 9th grade, and they're all sort of interacting in a very challenging way. Next big idea, just to help shape the discussion. In all our research and all our learnings, it really could be beneficial to chunk a kid's progression through school into 3 major chunks. There's the transition into school and sort of learning the basics and being socialized into the norms of schooling, just sort of pre-K to 4th grade, give or take. And I really want to commend you for the focus on pre-K kindergarten, right? That's really about that important launch and making sure kids don't start out behind. Just a brief side note, some of the highest levels of chronic absenteeism happen in pre-K and kindergarten. So if you don't focus on that too, you have this great investment in pre-KK, and some of the kids you very much want to come won't be there every day unless you also have an effort to make sure kids come every day. The other one, and I see you're doing great stuff on this too, is the transition from middle school to something else. And this is the big change, right? Because in the past, a lot of kids transition from high school to something else. In the past, high school was the end point for a lot of kids, right? That was good. You got a high school diploma, you can go find a good job. Go forth, do it. Now every kid has got to go somewhere from high school, in most cases. The military, job training, or university, community college. That's a very tough transition for a lot of kids, especially first-generation kids. People don't tell them the ropes, right? Think about it. From when you're a senior and you have enough credits to graduate, the school, you're done. You're a victory. You've got your credits. You're going to graduate. You're off the thing. You're not real to that state university system or that community college until you show up, have a schedule, have a place to live. Then they have some services. So there's a lot of room even in that senior year to fall off track. And so your efforts, going back to 11th grade and 12th grade, around the sort of the career opportunities in high school and the college opportunities in high school, I think are really important. Because that gives kids a taste of the next step while they're still in that sheltered, protective environment they know. And that really builds in a real... I'm actually taking a college course. I'm actually taking something with a career certificate. So I think that's a really huge thing you're looking at, and I really commend you to push on that hard. So what's left? And why am I here today? What's left is sort of the core body strength, 6th grade to 10th grade. 6th grade to 10th grade essentially is when kids go on one of 3 paths. They're on the path, they get launched in the path to dropping out, and we know from Columbus and other major urban areas this is still happening at high numbers, large percents of kids. Number 2, they're launched on the middling path. They will eke by. They will get a diploma, but they will be woefully underprepared for the next step. They will be doing just enough to get by. They will be able to, they modulate it. They understand I can come this much, I can do this much work, I get my diploma. Sort of have hazy ideas about where I'm going in my future, hazy connections about what I do now affecting later. And they're the ones that are going to our community colleges and our universities and needing all this remediation and often not making it past that remediation. And then the third group of kids will be launched to true career and college readiness. And what our research shows is early as 6th grade, the kids are sort of waving their hands which direction they're going. We just have to pay attention. We found in a high poverty environment, as early as 6th grade, about half your future dropouts are signaling by their attendance, their behavior, and their course performance. Kids missing a month or more in school, kids getting in sustained mild misbehavior or more, kids failing math or English in 6th grade, typically in high poverty environments, have somewhere between a 25 and 40% chance of graduating, absent intervention, absent focused work. That's sort of shocking. You're 12 years old, and if we don't do something, it's over, right? That doesn't work for us in America, right? We can't have that be the outcome. We also know from other research that the kids that own the state university system, the kids that have a high odds of going to the state university system and succeeding, are the kids that are really good at school by 9th grade. Right? They are the kids that are coming every day, not getting in trouble, no failures, they have a B or better average, and decent test scores. They have to actually do all 5 of those things. It's like being a 5-tool athlete. If you're doing all 5 of those things, those are the kids that will actually, if you trace it back, dominate your state university system. So what this tells us is we have a unified set of data, getting back to our thing early on, of attendance, behavior, and course performance that we need to play close track on and have sort of scaled interventions. So we drive down the kids that are doing poorly and we drive up more kids doing well. And it gives us sort of a unified theory of action. So how do we do this? So a couple of things have emerged nationally and in communities. The first is to actually have an early warning system. And Columbus is on the way of actually having a great one with the learning circles, which I think just needs to be embraced and pushed further and built out. Because without this data, we don't know who to give our efforts to, right? And that's really strategic. If we know who's signaling in 6th grade and in 9th grade, those are the kids we can wrap our services around, and it's a much more targeted, a much more effective use of our resources than sort of blanketing across all kids of a certain demographic, right? Which is sort of what we often fall back on. This lets us know who needs help, they're signaling, it lets us target them, and also the power of this data is it gives us rapid information. Is it working, right? Because when we just use things like test scores that only happen once a year and often come out 3, 4, 5 months later, there's 2 huge problems. One, if those test scores go up, there's 10 things going on in that school. Everyone takes credit. They all bask in the glory. Test scores went up. Whatever we did must have made the difference. Test scores went down. Nothing works. Got to throw it all out. Do something new. The truth is probably when test scores went up, 6 things were working and 4 weren't. And when test scores went down, 4 things were working and 6 weren't. But we have no way of knowing, right? But with this data, like attendance, behavior, course performance data, this is regular data. We have attendance data every day. We have grade data every quarter. We have behavior data real time. We can quickly see, we tried something, do those numbers go up? For this kid, did it get better? If not, we can change our plan. And over time, we can document what we did, and that's how we actually build local knowledge of what works for what kid and what situation, letting us be much more effective. So that's one. 2, we then need to understand how that data is distributed across schools, how educational challenge is across schools distributed. Because we're going to find some schools with hundreds of kids with these indicators, and some schools with tens of kids with these indicators. And that then helps us really figure out how our nonprofit assets can be distributed and our community assets. Because in those schools that have hundreds of kids, we've got to bring in what we call a second shift of adults, right? There's just not, in those situations, there's too many needy kids and not enough adults that have the time to do it because they're teaching classes. They're doing the stuff they have to do. They can do some, but a teacher can't reach out to 50 kids on her roster, and that's often the number. Heroically, they can do 10, right? So that's where we have to organize City Year, United Way, communities and schools, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, National Urban League, all these really solid, powerful folks that really have assets. It's a way to know where they can be the most effective and who they can work against. Third, we got to bring teachers into the game, right? We can't wrap, as much as we need to bring more supports in, we can't just say someone else is going to take care of getting the kid to school, getting them to behave, and getting them to get their work done. Because that gets back to my relationship point, right? At the end of the day, kids come to school, try hard, and work for the people they have relationships with in the school. And that's mainly going to be their teachers. There could be other people supporting them and helping. So we have to have teachers, part of the team that reviews this data and figures out what to do and pools that knowledge so that math and English teacher can talk to each other and share that information about that student. Or that I figured out a way for this challenging student to settle down. I can share it with you. And if we don't create that space, that information never gets shared. And the other reason that's really important in high poverty environments is, again, what motivates kids to come to school, work hard, and behave, more often than not, is when they have a positive adult relationship and they want to please that person who helps them. Because the truth is, a lot of the things that motivated us to be in this room we're here today, and I know many of us came from humble circumstances and challenging circumstances, but somewhere along the line, we came to believe that effort would lead to success, and that we had lived examples to back that up. It wasn't just some sort of distant fantasy. But in many high-poverty environments, the lived experience is that life is capricious, not that you work hard and then something good automatically happens. Because they know that they see their parents are often incredibly hardworking, often getting up incredibly early, taking multiple buses, working multiple jobs, being a home health care aide, working the midnight shift, right? And they know despite all that effort, that bad stuff still happens. They still get foreclosed on. All these things happen, which undercuts that idea that, oh, if I work hard today, some great thing's going to happen tomorrow. We have to keep building that. We have to give them belief in that. We have to create shaped experiences. But in the interim, they come to school for that person, not for this distant idea that if I work hard, great stuff will come. So we have to build that bridge. While we're building that bridge, it's the people that bring them into the school. So we have to organize the people to give that support. We then need to implement tiered intervention systems. We have to have whole school prevention for all these things. If we know we have an attendance, behavior problem, or course performance for the whole school, we got to do something up front, whole school wide, to make that better. For kids that need mid-level supports, we often call it nagging and nurturing, we have to have, that's a great role for people like Cydia and near-peer leaders. Someone to say every day, Sam, I'm so glad to see you in school today. It's so exciting to have you here. And you know, I expect to see you tomorrow. And if not, I'm going to come get you. And you will. And, oh, Sam's not happy. Too much nagging. Did you get your homework done? Really? I saw your head down in English class yesterday. Let's double check that you actually know what's going on. Oh, and I know you and Mr. Brown are sort of going at it. And I know you've told me he's mean. But I've talked to Mr. Brown, and he thinks you're sarcastic. And that's just not going to work, right, until we get you together and figure it out. That takes 40 seconds. But you need it every day. And maybe 150 kids need it. So if you don't have the extra person power to give that mid-level thing, you're in trouble. And then the really high-needs kids need case management. And we have to do it right, and we have to find the right solution. Because there are kids staying out of school to get grandma my diabetes shot because I don't trust anyone else to do it. I'm homeless, and I haven't told anybody. I'm just couch surfing. There's mental health, there's drug addiction, there's all kinds of real issues that we have to have the capacity to case manage. And then finally, our work with Diplomas Now here in Columbus, for the most impacted schools, we have to combine all that with whole school reform, right? We've got to actually make the school be successful, have good instruction going on, have supported teachers, use evidence-based curriculums. And that's really what we're trying to do in this Diplomas Now model, which is really trying to combine whole school reform with enhanced student supports guided by an early warning system. And the exciting thing is, you heard, Columbus is partaking with 10 other districts in this large Investing in Innovation Award from the federal government to test out promising strategies. And we're actually conducting a randomized study, like a medical trial, to get high-level evidence. So in Columbus, there's 3 schools in, but there were 6 schools initially. And of those 6, 3 were randomly selected to do it, South, Mifflin, and Linden, and 3 others were selected to be controls. So that's going to help us get real solid evidence of what works where. And we're seeing promising results. At 2 of those schools last year, at the end of the first semester, more than half of the 9th graders were at risk for dropping out. They had poor attendance, poor behavior, poor course performance. In those 2 schools, this year it was half that. It was only a quarter of the kids. That's still a long way to go, but it shows that big movement can be made in a short period of time. And the other school got better, but not to the same degree. So last point on the general effort to keep more kids in school before we switch to discipline and climate as an example. This idea of using data, of organizing adults, forming the relationships, having a tiered response, whole school targeted, intensive, continual building the knowledge base of what works for who, is really important first and foremost because that's what's going to get more kids to graduate. It's going to get more kids to graduate ready for college and career. It's going to make them strong. It's going to make the community strong. The other thing to keep in mind is it's going to save some money too that could be reinvested in that prevention. And let me explain how that happens. What happens to these kids before they drop out is they get retained in grade often multiple times. And there is high rates, I look quickly, of retention in Columbus like other places, especially in the 9th grade. Well, the national data is if you were retained in 9th grade in a high poverty environment, you have only a 1 in 4 chance of graduating. So we could say that we're spending $10,000 a year on average for each of these kids to repeat the 9th grade. If we have 1,000 kids doing that, which I bet you do, we're spending $10 million a year, okay, on a strategy that has a 25% success rate. Right? If I came to you and said, I have the greatest thing for the Columbus Commission. I want you to invest in this world-beating strategy. It's going to cost you $10 million, and it's going to work 25% of the time. Right? You would probably kick me out of the room at that point. So by keeping kids on track and on time, because kids that say are on track and on time 6th to 10th grade graduate at a 4 times higher rate than kids that don't. It's much better for them, but by preventing them from having to do grade retention in the 9th grade, we actually find the source of the money to pay for that prevention. And it's on an annual basis. It's not like, oh, in 10 years we can find that money. It's like you're going to spend that money next year on those kids with those outcomes. All right, school discipline and climate. Let's use this as an example of what we were talking about and help us think through this important area. So first of all, I think everybody would agree who's studied this and been in schools and actually tried to work in schools and study them, is that order is important. You have to have good order in school to have good learning, right? It's what keeps kids focused, it's what keeps adults focused, it keeps them safe, and it keeps them coming back, right? Teachers don't like disorderly schools. They don't stay, which leads to a lot of turnover. Kids don't like disorderly schools. They don't feel safe. They don't feel focused. So order is important as a given, right? And we need clear and consistent consequences for misbehavior. All the data shows that places succeed have clear and consistent consequences. And when you talk to kids and you interview them and say, what do you want in a school? What do you want in a teacher? The overwhelming thing is, I want it to be firm but fair. I want it to be demanding but caring. And it's those two things together that's the trick, right? Because we can be firm, but maybe not always fair, right? It's the rule. That's what it is. That's sort of zero tolerance. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter it was a little midget pocket knife that couldn't hurt anybody. That's the same as a big nasty switchblade. No debate. We're out. Or we could be sort of every case is individual. We don't really have a rule. We're going to talk about it. And we're going to figure out what happens. And then the kids basically then learn that there's no consequence. And that's a place you don't want to be. Okay? Same thing with tough but demanding but caring. We can be demanding. These are the standards, these are the rules, you must obey. That's important. But if we don't have some understanding of your circumstances too, or we can understand that actually, yeah, you went off today because you saw someone shot last night, right? If we don't have the capacity to have that built in, then we're not going to hold the kids either. So how do we maintain order, but have it be firm and fair, caring and demanding? Well, the first thing we have to really admit, and this evidence was released on Monday, we can get it to you, really made it strong, is that we can't suspend our way to order. And we can't suspend our way to being firm and fair and tough and caring. We have to have suspensions. They're important. We're not saying it's schools that were told no suspensions or, again, places you don't want to be. But they've got to be the exception, not the norm, not the first go-to action. Because when you look at the data is astounding. The number of suspensions has gone up tremendously since the 1970s. There is overwhelming evidence that they are given disproportionately to students of color and students with disabilities. Controlling for poverty, controlling for the act of misdeed they did. It's just overwhelmingly, there is still a sense of bias against those groups, and they get disciplined at a far higher rate for similar things, and it's not effective. The other thing is that most kids that get suspended in the secondary grades get suspended multiple times, which should be the first indicator it's not working, right? You could build this theory that a suspension is like an adolescent version of a kid's timeout. Go cool off, go take a minute to calm down, go reflect on your actions, come back tomorrow, we'll all be fine. If that's the case, one suspension should do it, right? If it's effective. But if most kids that get suspended multiple times, that tells us that it's not a very effective strategy, because we have to keep going to it again and again. And then the final kicker, we traced all the kids in Florida in 9th grade that were suspended, and we found two things. One, each suspension lowered the odds of graduating by 20%, controlling for other factors and demographics. Because what the kids are seeing that suspension as is not the adolescent version of the timeout in sort of a strong, caring relationship. They're essentially seeing that as being shunned. Go away. We don't want you here. Leave. Don't be a part of us. This is your only path to a future, but we don't care. We don't want you here. Go away. Right? And that's what's sort of how it's being interpreted. So it has bad academic outcomes, other people have traced these kids into their 20s and find it's associated with more involvement with crime, not less, and that the kids were not involved with crime before they got suspended. It's not like just very off the charts kids are getting suspended and they're going on and doing crime anyways, right? There is patterns there that sometimes the suspension is the first sort of involvement with official disciplinary action leading to other things. And it's costly because, again, it's associated with this grade retention and this dropping out, which has lots of costs. So what are the alternatives? Because we have to be firm and fair. We have to have order. A couple of things. Well, the early warning systems we talked about, and moving early when we see just mild misbehavior in the middle grades, and trying to solve that at that level before it sort of manifests itself into bigger problems. Second of all, when we saw that chart, it was a perfect chart, right? 7% of kids getting a high percent of the disciplinary actions. If you break that 7% down, you're going to find two groups of kids. You're going to find a small group of essentially truly violent, essentially criminals doing criminal activity. Very small percent. And actually, schools are pretty good about acting against that through expulsions and arrests. Partly because that action is very visible. There's lots of witnesses. If you actually commit a violent act in school, right, we know who it is, right? We see it, right? The bigger chunk of those kids are kids that actually need therapeutic supports. They have just, in most cases, themselves experienced lots of violence, experience all kinds of trauma. And if schools don't have access to the supports for those kids, they are hellraisers, if we're honest. They are not, they do create real problems in the school. But the answer for that subgroup is there's groups like Turnaround for Children, the PAIR Project in Boston, Communities in Schools is good at this, that can actually link them up with therapeutic supports. And that's the way to help those kids and also deal with the fact that they need to be dealt with. They just can't be said, we're going to tolerate this. If you remember that chart, there was that gray area we didn't talk about. We said 53% of kids, no discipline, 7%, half. That leaves like 43%, if I did my math right, or something like that, that's getting some disciplinary infractions. Those are the ones we have to change the picture on, right? Because those are the ones that are getting it for like disrespect, not following school rules. It's not violence, it's not threatening, it's not danger. They're actually not even the hellraisers. They're sort of the pain in the asses, okay, if we're honest. Those are the kids we need to have the alternatives for, which is they need a sanction, but it's a sanction that keeps them in school, doesn't send them away, doesn't give this shunning message. There are good evidence-based strategies. Restorative justice, various versions of community service, various ways of saying you did something that caused disruption, you have to give back to the community, but in a more supportive way, not like you broke the rule, go, and then have all those negative consequences follow. The other thing, and you're going to say this sounds like a broken record, but I hope it ties it together, is this most recent research. There was two very strong studies which really circled back to this relationship issue. So in Chicago, they found in the highest crime, most violent neighborhoods, there was a set of schools with a high perception of safety among people in the building, limited suspensions, and objective evidence of safety that was equal to the affluent schools of the suburbs. There was another set of schools where it was pure chaos. Everybody didn't feel safe. There was a lot of violence. The huge difference between those schools is the schools in the high crime, high poverty neighborhoods had very strong student-teacher relationships. And basically, if that relationship is strong, kids by and large behave, even when they come from environments that don't support that. So that was key. A study from Virginia found when they invested in high-quality professional development for teachers, really coaching in the classroom with a peer, that was really focused on improving their ability to build relationships with students in the classroom, to get them engaged, to get them participating, which helped both their coursework and also drove down suspensions. And that was a randomized study against a high level of evidence. So the point is, we need to work as a community to keep kids on time and on track 6th through 10th grade. We need early warning systems. We need to bring our nonprofits in and focus them on the schools with the highest percent of these kids. We need teachers in the game by having regular meetings where this data is shared and innovations are put together. And the highest need schools, we've got to combine it with whole school reform efforts. And we really have to work to really create strong supportive adult relationships at the secondary level between students and teachers while having solutions for that 7%. Solve that 7%, you'll take so much of the pressure off in the schools that there'll be space for those relationships to form. And that 7% is really 2 groups of kids, and you have to approach it that way. So in conclusion, so we have time for questions, this is really important work. We get this core body strength right in the middle, 6th to 10th grade. It ties together your 2 other efforts, right? Getting kids into school, getting them ready, getting them engaged, not starting out behind, building really strong pathways with lived experience in school of what college and career is like. So you have the you know, just add that middle piece and you'll have a very strong plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful presentation. Do we have any questions?
Dr. Balfans, I'm curious as to whether there is data available which indicates how good a predictor a lot of the early standardized tests are for the ultimate performance of kids from impoverished communities, right, irrespective of race, gender, right, etc. Right.
So here's how that works. Reading by 3rd grade is a good predictor, and that's typically measured by some kind of test, because that shows that if you really struggle to read by 3rd grade, it's hard to catch up, and we're going to soon pivot to reading to learn. And if you're behind, then you're behind at a key point. Test scores are an important indicator, but even the ACT, the people that make their livelihood with tests, have recent data out that shows that they predict about 1/3 of the outcome. The other 1/3 is predicted by grades, because what grades really show is that you can do the work over time, right? That you had to show up to do it, you had to get your assignments in, you had to self-manage yourself, and I'm talking about what matters for success in college. That's what I'm saying is this outcome, is that if you don't have that ability, there's a bunch of kids that have high test scores and still struggle because they don't have the ability to do that they got low grades still because they're not coming, they're not getting their act together. And then the 3rd one is what we call these academic behaviors, which is really about that. Like, did you get your work in? Are you working to your capacities? And it's only when you have those 3 things together that you get a very strong set of predictors of what path the student's on. And you have this, 3-legged stool, if you will. You get 3 legs, the stool stands up. You just have 1. It's going to give 2, so that it's really those 3 together.
Tanny?
Good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm not sure you spoke about grade retention.
Right.
So as we're going into our next year, we have this 3rd grade reading guarantee, and we know that currently about 40% of our 3rd graders will not pass that. So, what is your view of, I know we read quite a bit about grade retention,
right,
and what can we be doing
right,
in our schools now?
So the grade retention literature is split first in 2 between early retention and late retention. So there's almost no evidence to support retention after 6th grade, just the cost benefits that are so much to the negatives that because again, you're in early adolescence, and no one's angrier than a 16-year-old 8th grader, right? Especially if you have multiple gates, like there was a 3rd grade gate, didn't make it, and there was like a 6th grade gate, didn't make it. You're creating 16-year-old 8th graders. There's almost no solution for those kids, to tell you the truth. So you got to prevent getting to that place. By and large, it's much better whenever you can to prevent that retention. There is some evidence, it's mixed evidence, that the 3rd grade retention thing can work, but only if it's really followed with the true actual additional supports. Too often what happens is people say, we're going to have the retention, which at some level is the easy thing to do. You pass a law, right, to be honest. and the promise is we're going to match it with lots of resources. And then that's money, and that's hard. And those resources don't always flow, and people just hope that, the pressure, you don't want to be retained, so you're going to work harder. That's like the signal. And B, if you do, a second year will help you out. But if we don't pair that early retention with actually doing something different, what would make us think doing the same thing again a second time is going to have any different result? I mean, in our lived experience outside of the world, right, if something didn't work, you never just do the same thing again a second time as your strategy. Like if you're in business, that's not going to, right? You go to your boss, well, our plan failed, but my strategy is to try the same thing again next year, right? Or politics, anywhere, right? So it can work, but it has to be very thoughtful, and you got to put the two together. And my opinion from my reading of the research is after third grade, it's also negative. And you just want to prevent, and it's not saying, we're not saying social promotion, you need rapid intervention. Saturday, summer, extra, up front is what matters. And using this data lets us get there. It's the new way of doing it. By having this data, we can have rapid, real-time, quick intervention. That's much more effective than sort of waiting for it to happen and then trying to fix it.
Good morning, Doctor. You mentioned the importance of broad-based community engagement to help the schools. In your research, have you come across some great examples that are not pilots that might be working in communities, but can you talk to us about a community or two who has really gotten this right in terms of not only collaboration, but integrated collaboration with the schools on a broad-based level?
Yeah. To be truthful, I've seen places do parts of it. I don't have like, just, Phoenix, I'm making it up. It's got it together, right? I've seen places work, for example, on chronic absenteeism. Baltimore is pretty good on that. New York City is pretty good on that. I've seen some others do it with the after-school space. Providence has done a really good thing of integrating their after-school space, getting them all to use sort of these ABC indicators as common outputs, figuring out which schools need what types of after-school, and having a big sort of organizing framework. So I can't actually, unfortunately, tell you, like, this is the go place to learn from, because it's sort of, it's hard, and it's just people are just coming to this realization that real invested collaboration, A, you got to be in it for the long haul. It's not like we can do it in a year and make it work. And two, there's just been over time, just been a lot of like, not even planned, but just happened to sort of boundaries put up. And people have moved to like co-location in the building, like when the after-school folks move in when the day is done, but they're still not even integrated at that level to what's actually happening in the school day. Part of it's data, and that's where the places I've seen make it work, Hartford might be another one, Connecticut, is they actually need a leadership from the mayor to get the data agreements that will let that data be shared. People have worked this out. They get nervous about privacy laws, and rightly so, and it just seems too big of a push. And without somebody else saying, no, we're going to solve it, and we're going to get that data flow going so we can actually do it, it doesn't happen. So I think that's a very key thing, in my experience, for the mayor or somebody to take the lead on.
Thank you. Hi, Dr.
Hi.
Belfance. And you just mentioned that basically from K to third grade, I mean, we obviously know that from really in the womb to grade 3,
Right.
children learn to read.
Right.
And you just mentioned that by the third grade, if that young person is not, you read to learn,
Right.
you're learning to read from the womb to third grade,
Right.
and you read to learn from the fourth grade on.
Right.
And so you just mentioned how important it is to have interventions. I mean, obviously we're going to focus on early childhood education, but also during the same period, how important it is for K to third
Right.
grade to be able to read. And so thinking about, as you mentioned, the numbers are very high.
Right.
It's pretty difficult for the teacher to be able to reach every single student, and
Right.
she has half of her students
Yep.
behind.
Right.
And so I think that goes into the point of we have to really think about investing in community organizations
Yes.
that focus on that. And that certainly it requires, and I think this one-on-one, I mean, it's not about just having
Right.
a few interventions.
Right.
When you have a child that's far behind, you need a consistent person working with that child to move them forward.
Right.
And I think that's where you're basically saying organizations like, even though I know people know that I was with City Year, but organizations like City Year working one-on-one with children, communities and schools being there with children, because it's going to require intense effort in that regard to move those children forward. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and again, it's this idea of tiering it. So even it works at all levels. So first, you need some better evidence-based instruction happening in the school that's really attuned to how we help kids at different points read. Second of all, there is that group of kids that just need sort of mid-level, more focused attention. That's where the nonprofits can play a big role. There's a group called Experience Corps, for example, which brings in retired folks, and they often are good with a K through 3, sort of a grandma, grandfather approach. And then there's going to be a subset of kids that have true serious issues you're going to need a specialist for. And you need to sort of chunk it, because you can't afford a specialist for everybody. That you really need to have that upfront prevention, that middle tier, one-on-one attention, not necessarily from like a trained reading professional, but they need to have some knowledge of the evidence base, but they're not, you know, a degreed professional. And then for the highest need kids, you do need that specialist, because it's a true, deeper problem.
Just a second. Carol, he did hit me. Bo, you go next.
Oh, I can go first.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't have my mic on.
Thank you. My microphone keeps cutting off after about a minute. I'm curious just to kind of take a different perspective and ask the perspective of the teacher, because we talked about how suspending students should really be a last resort. That's not the answer. Obviously, it hasn't been effective. But what about those teachers who may say that given that it's the 7% or it's the 2 students in my class who continually disrupt the environment, and that we spend so much time and energy on trying to intervene with those students that it distracts from my ability. So how do you find the balance between continuing to have programs and resources targeting that 7% versus, you know, what is the answer then to the...
So absolutely. So this is what I was trying to get on. I'm glad you helped me clarify it. I'm not in any way suggesting asking the teachers to suck it up, because they're our most valuable resource. Getting back to that thing of the quality of the coursework kids do, which drives the learning, you got to be able to focus on that. And the more you have to stop and start, the more that breaks the consistency and the flow you need to have that good lesson. So again, it's back to the 3-tiered approach. That school first needs some good upfront things to have a strong culture and climate, truly backed by the leadership, which it really comes down to. You have to have the leadership saying, we have certain core rules, we apply them fairly and firmly, we're not capricious, everyone knows what they are, and there's a consequence. We just need to build in a consequence short of suspension that's real. So that could be better uses of detention, more with some community service aspect. It could be this idea of restorative justice, where you actually have to, you know, make amends for what you did. Think of things the kids value in the school and take those away in the short term, but keep them in school. But you need a solid program for that. It can't be loosey-goosey. It's got to, and you know, this is a thing that's at a school level. You don't want to dictate too much, but they need to have something that meets that criteria. You then need to have some ability for that mid-level thing to take them out of that flow. And that's where sometimes, like in the schools we work in, City Year has this whole thing that kids that are showing those behavior signals, they have a whole, they get basically enrolled in a 50 acts of leadership curriculum that meets at lunchtime and tries to turn them from being annoying to being leaders. Because oftentimes there's an energy and a skills there that can be turned positive, and they need an outlet. So you need to do that. And then for the truly, truly challenging students, you need somebody else who can solve that for the teacher, not them. I mean, for that 2 to 7%, you've got to have the capacity. If it's truly violent, it's handled by one segment. And if it's the therapeutic thing, we've got to make sure we have, they know, not even the teacher, but someone, the counselor, someone at the school knows how to get that student to those therapeutic supports. And they're real. And somebody sort of case managed. That's really what CIS, Communities in Schools, does a lot, is that it's that case management, not just a referral. Here, these people will help you out. That's not going to work. It's like, I'll go with you. We'll make sure you get there. We'll talk about it. If it didn't work, we'll go to plan B. So it's really having that solid plan that reaches at all those 3 levels that actually gives the teacher the support to do their lesson. Once they have the support to do their lesson, they have breathing time and to do more of this outreach because they're not exhausted by the continual fight against those few kids.
Good morning.
Morning.
Could you share information in terms of your work with parents or parental involvement?
So in that same research, it was really the strength of the student-teacher and parent-teacher relationships that really led to the greatest feeling of safety. And there's sort of an elementary and secondary answer to that, because we have to recognize that by secondary, it's sometimes harder to get the kids to get their parents into school. We have to have different strategies. So one thing that often helps, again, is helping to share some of this report card conferencing, jumping around, right? Is this idea where often by secondary grades, no one reflects on the student on the report card. The student makes sure it doesn't get home. Home is busy. Teachers don't know what the different grades are. You just know your grade, right? So we organize these things where often community members come in and give the kids a 5 to 10 minute conversation about the report card. And then, once they know how to do it, the students start leading the conference and invite the parent in. And then you sort of have this idea of the student, the outside person, and the parent all talking together about that report card. But in a way that's empowering to the student to invite the parent, as opposed to the parent trying to say, do better, right? And sometimes it's not. So it's a critical area. The truth of my experience is it still remains really tough at the secondary level. We need new ideas in that area, because schools will tell you, and I don't disagree, that they often feel they put energy into it and don't get a great response. It's probably because they're not being strategic in that energy and they're not being thoughtful in that energy. But we have to sort of figure out that issue.
But in the case where a student might need therapy intervention, or in regards to discipline if there's some criminal activity, has there been a process in order to be able to get that work done, or be able to share with the parents what's going on?
Yes, you're right. So in those cases, yes, the schools we work with, there is a very defined process to get parental involvement, because you have to. I mean, it's not going to work if you don't.
Rhonda?
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a classroom teacher, so we love this stuff. We love law and order. But Learning Circles is doing a great job identifying, the issues around students, the early warning, so around attendance, grades, and discipline. But I don't think we capture the other things that happen in schools, and so discipline could be underreported in many buildings. And so then the data may show that students might be doing okay, suspensions are down, but teachers are leaving and students are leaving. How do you get buildings to have this reality check that even though your suspensions may be down, you don't have law and order, and people are, choosing with their feet to leave the buildings anyway?
Right. So, that's the good point, is that sort of like the analogy to the reading by third grade, and it's easy to pass the law and hard to get the resources. There's the danger in suspension. It's easy to either regulate or change policy or send the implicit message, don't suspend kids anymore, and we're watching it, and not put the solutions behind it. The very good solution for that, to get the counter evidence, is student surveys, right? That now are done on the web, that can now be done, it's easier, can't be as controlled, right? Teacher surveys. And those have been found to be very useful and very predictive. In fact, getting back to my friends at the ACT, they would claim, yeah, all these indicators are great, but give me the kids' grades and give me a student survey and I can tell you what's happening also. So I think that's another dimension to add, and that survey can give you information on a broad range of things, not just discipline, but it really, there's the Chicago 5 Essentials is a nice tool to look at. It was developed by University of Chicago and Chicago School District, and there's a student, teacher, and parent one. And they've, in fact, either further related different levels to that to what they call different capacities for school improvement. So it'll tell you in different domains, you have high capacity here to do better. Here you actually have low capacity, and if we don't address it, And what's sort of nice about that, by putting it in a capacity as opposed to good and bad, it sort of takes a little bit of the gotcha stigma out of it. But I think that would be a good tool to add to the toolbox. It would help sort of address some of those issues.
I know we got one more question, and if that's okay with you, Doctor, and I'll ask it. But we've done a lot of we've had a lot of discussion about the role of the principal in the school and how important that role is. And you've a couple of times mentioned leadership. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Is that the principal? And just one comment, I think most of us around the table might remember, I thought teachers were nurturers and principals were disciplinarians.
So, yes, the principal and in a big high school, the leadership team, which is the principal, the assistant principals, and some sub-leaders, are absolutely critical. You're not going to find a school with a strong climate and a strong culture that climate and culture is not being led and driven by the principal. It is really a key factor. Just because, again, just because what you said, people are so geared to follow the principal, to follow his or her signals, that it's hard for them to work around if it's not supportive of what they're. I mean, some people manage to do it, but it's very hard. So that principal being the one to figure out firm but fair, tough but caring, and really their job, among my view, is really the consistency. Because it's that consistent, if we have consistent academic and behavioral expectations at the school, and then teachers have them classroom to classroom, because that's the other thing to remember, in secondary schools, school for kids is the collection of classrooms they travel through. And if we don't have consistent academic and behavioral expectations classroom to classroom, so it's actually principal and teacher now, the kids then learn, you're the mean teacher, you're the nice teacher. You're the easy teacher, you're the hard teacher. I behave accordingly. If we all do it the same, they internalize, this is how I behave in school. And once I'm in the building, I behave this way because I get clear, consistent messages starting with the principal, but actually carried out as they travel through classes. You find a school like that, you find a school with strong culture and climate. You find fissures, and you find it somewhere down, somewhere less. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let's give them a warm welcome.
My pleasure.
Well, you can see it's 10:30, and we have posted a break. Is that going to work out? Okay, let's take a break for about 15 minutes.